I'm Rabbi Joe Blair, and I've been asked to speak a little bit about something on Jewish ethics for the Jewish Values Online Drasha series, and I've chosen to talk a little bit about Parshat Toldot. This is from Genesis 25:19 through 28:9. And this is one of those portions that has a tremendous amount that has to do with values and ethics. And I thought we'd just talk a little bit about some of the matters that come up in at least a brief form. First, we start out, and right away, we have the story, as this begins, of Jacob and Esau being born to Rebekah and Isaac. Jacob and Esau being the twins who are struggling from the time they are conceived all the way through their lives. And the first place that I'd like to point out is in verses 29 to 34 in chapter 25. That's where we have the story that Esau has gone out hunting and has been unsuccessful. Jacob is at home, as is his wont, and he has made a soup, a stew, probably a lentil stew. And Esau comes in and is famished and smells the soup and says to Jacob, "Please let me have some." And Jacob says, "Okay, fine, I'll be glad to let you do so. But what you'll have to do is you'll have to sell me your birthright in exchange for this soup." Now, Esau's argument to himself is, what good is my birthright? If I die of hunger, I'm going to not be able to use it anyway. Fine, let's do this. So he exchanges the birthright for this soup, and the text tells us that Esau has in that way despised his birthright. The question that arises in my mind, at least, is that this is really not so clear a despisement on Esau's part. What Jacob has done is he's found somebody in a dire strait, and he has, rather than helping them, has made a transaction which is not exactly at arm's length. This is a question of dealing from a very uneven or unequal position. And so what he's had to do is take advantage of his brother and his brother's position. And this is really at issue because when we start talking about or thinking about a contract or an arrangement or an agreement we make with someone, we have a sense that everybody should be dealing from at least a position where they know the other party's positions, but they also know that they're dealing not from a matter of life and death on the one hand versus some kind of earning of a profit on the other. And Jacob is going to be given the sense of earning the birthright, changing the birth order, if you will, being firstborn in that sense, which to him matters. But it's not a matter of life and death. Whereas Esau may be sitting there and saying, "I'm starving, I'm dying. And so as a matter of life and death, I don't have a choice. This isn't a fair trade. This isn't a good deal. And I can't really do anything about it. I have to accept it no matter what the conditions, no matter what's said." So we have a real concern here with what the ethical issue is that Jacob engages in this transaction. And we don't really have an answer, but it goes on and we continue forward from here. And of course, Esau, it does eat. Esau does wind up surviving, and Jacob deals with him further as time goes on. The place that this bothers me a little bit in thinking about is if we found someone who is literally starving, would we turn to them and say, "Oh, well, if you give me whatever property rights you have in something, then I'll let you eat"? That's the equivalent, and that's the problem that we have here. So that's where we start in this portion. The next thing that we have is a sort of side issue. When we look at chapter 26, verses 6 through 11, where we have Jacob who immediately turns around and claims that his wife is his sister in order to preserve his life. Now, this is not something that's unique to Jacob. That's happened before with Abraham twice before, and it is a way of assuring that the people of the land won't kill him in order to take his widow as their wife. But it is a questionable behavior because it's certainly telling something that is not true, and we have to worry about what kind of an example that sets. The ethics here are, if you are going to be in the position of placing your life in jeopardy, would you be justified in telling an absolute outright falsehood? And there's some question. Here, it's not clear that he's in jeopardy, and so there's a little bit less clarity about whether that's a good thing to do. But of course, we don't know for sure. We're not in the position. We don't have a sense of what's going on. And he has the precedent of his father having done this before him. So maybe this is okay. We can argue it. It's less certain. The third thing that I would point out is that in chapter 27, verses 6 through 45, we have a long sequence telling the story of how Rebecca hears or overhears Isaac telling Esau to go out and get some fresh game for him so that he will feel moved to bless him as he feels his life is approaching. Rebecca then turns to her son, her other son, the twin, Jacob, and tells him to prepare himself. She will cook the food. He will dress himself in a way so as to disguise his person and pretend to be his brother Esau, take in the food that Rebecca prepares, and get the blessing from his father without his father being aware of it, because his father is blinded at the end of his life. So he can fool him by wearing the clothing that will smell appropriately, wearing the skins that will give him the sense of being covered in hair so that he will feel correct, and so forth. And then he can make the claims. Isaac is slightly suspicious, but he accepts this. And after eating the food that is presented to him, he does, in fact, bless Jacob. Esau returns with the game, prepares it, brings it in to Jacob, and he finds out at that moment, and Jacob also learns, that he has blessed his younger son rather than his older. The blessing that he then gives to his older son, Esau, is far less favorable. And he says effectively that this is all I can give you. So at this point, Rebecca has deceived her husband, has conspired with her son, and has had her son deceive his father in order to benefit that son over her other son, who would normally, in the system of primogeniture, the firstborn receiving the bulk of the benefits, be given both the blessing and the inheritance. And this is what has now, in this little sequence of text, our concern here is this appropriate? Is this something that we should be concerned about with a wife deceiving her husband, with a mother telling her son to deceive his father, with a mother telling a son that he should take something that belongs to his sibling, and so forth? These are this whole intermixture of issues relating to the relationships and the family members and so forth, that bring up these questions of ethics. And what we find ourselves thinking is all of this is problematic And it's complicated yet further by the very fact that this is precisely what Rebecca was told before the children were born by God. So is this something that she has initiated because this is what she wants to happen? Is this her trying to fulfill what God has told her is to be? Is this God's way of accomplishing this? What's going on in that regard? And we're uncertain in the end, but we know that there's a lot of ill will generated because all of these parties have ways which we know they're going to feel are at least unfair, if not outright unethical and questionable in terms of what values we have. So this section certainly raises some questions. Finally, at the end of that section, chapter 27, verse 46, Rebecca does one more thing. She tells Jacob to leave, and she goes to his father and she gives the reason that she doesn't want him to marry one of the Canaanite women, as his brother has done. She wants him to go back and find a wife among her own people. And so he is told to go back and find a wife who is one of the daughters of Laban, who is Rebecca's brother. So again, she's not telling her husband specifically what she's doing or why. She's giving him a partial reason. And there's maybe it's a better way to make peace. Maybe it's not, but there's a question that's raised. So the issue here is, what values are we upholding or violating in terms of Jewish values that we hold? And certainly we're supposed to be dealing fairly. We're supposed to be doing things that are reasonably fair and treating others as we would like to be treated. And that's not what we're seeing, although there's a question about whether there's this overarching sense of this being what needs to happen in order to fulfill what God has declared and decreed will be the case. And so the ethics and the issues that are raised in terms of values are unclearly responded to or answered, but they are out there for us to be considering. And this is one of the pieces of text where we wind up to continue to wrestle with what this means and how we should take it in and live it in our own lives as an example. Thank you very much.